Hello everyone. I'm alive. I am here. Summer has unfortunately come and gone and I haven't talked about books at all. I haven't really filmed at all. I've started a bunch of vlogs and just kind of fell off it, didn't finish them. And today I am attempting to wrap up the books I read in June, July, and August. I know that might be a heavy lift, and some of these books I feel like I read so long ago, and some of them I just feel like my thoughts are gone or they're jumbled up in my head, but I really want to finish this chapter, this seasonal chapter, and move on. But it is better in my brain when I talk about books that I read like in the span of a month, because now, like, looking at some of these books, I really did read them so long ago that I don't even, like, I remember what they were about, and I remember how I felt about them, the good, bad, amazing, but I just don't know how to speak about them eloquently. And I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter. Who cares how we speak about books? You can talk about them however you want. But in my mind, I like to come on here and at least give you a little bit of recommendation, or not even a recommendation, but the way that I speak about books, that helps you decide if you want to pick them up and try them for yourselves. And I don't know if I will do a good job of that. So I do have my phone to try. I have like very disparate notes. This is not going to be like, you know, a well-formed wrap-up, but I am going to do it anyway. Even if it's bad, I'm going to do it anyway. All right, so we'll start with June. So the one book that I actually did a reading vlog for and I finished was the Doloriad by Missouri Williams. So I did talk about this book at length. So if you really want to know like more details, I would recommend watching that video. But this is one of the highlights of my reading year so far. I absolutely loved this. This is an apocalyptic tale about an incestual family line that's living on the fringe, on like a compound in a very small, tight-knit, depraved community, all under the watchful eye of the matriarch. This woman breeding her own destruction. It's really dark, depraved, and I described it in that reading vlog as like a bodily book. It's exhausting. The language is like very intense and taut, and you really feel every word that Williams is writing. There's a lot of like forcing, tearing, pulling, lugging, tugging for a lot of our characters. Sorry, I do have my notes here. But it is a study of the maternal, what that means. There's a few different maternal characters in this book. It is about evolving morality because there are a few different generations of children from this family line. There's a lot of different power plays and power dynamics going on. Who you might think has all the power might not really have all the power. It's about faith and the enchantment of faith and how that kind of contains people, and what happens when you lose that. What I really enjoyed about this book, we really get to peek into the minds of a lot of people on the compound. The matriarch herself, which I kind of thought we would never get into her mind, because she would be like this omnipotent figure that just sees everything but we don't understand her past or the way that her mind is working, but we do actually enter her mind. And that was some of the best parts, but it is like vile. There's a horrific rape scene. There's like layers and layers of cruelty and harm, and it's seeped in violence, this whole book, because that's what's really running the compound. I absolutely loved this. I thought it was like perfectly written. The writing is like so taut and tight in this book. Every word is there for a reason. It's similar to The Passion of New Eve, where like the author didn't waste a single sentence, and everything is made to make you feel claustrophobic and tense and exhausted. But it was a character study, like this groupthink character study, but there's moments of fragmenting and people that you think might be like, you know, passive in a situation. There's a lot of, you can feel the moments where there's shifting happening, and even more so than like the physicality of this book, there's a lot of moments where you can feel how one child might be looking at the matriarch, and maybe what they used to accept as truth is like faltering, and there's moments where you're like, oh, you're screwed, and it's just watching it all play out. So I absolutely loved this. Would highly, highly recommend. It's one of my favorite things I've read so far this year. So I can't wait to see what else Missouri Williams comes out with, because I do love this kind of like taut, intense read sometimes. But then when that left a bad taste in my mouth, because it is vile and violent to the extreme. I mean, it's a book based on incest and what that all means. So I turned to Anne of Green Gables to kind of lift my spirits. Obviously, this is the first in the series. I was home for a weekend and just returned to Anne. She is like a very important character in my life, and I love her fiery red hair and the way she has this romantical view of the world. So this was just kind of a palate cleanser. So not much to say other than I highly recommend anything with Anne. Then I read a book, and this is one that I don't have much to say about it because it didn't, sorry, I'm like very uncomfortable. So I'm like not used to sitting here. I didn't enjoy it, or I thought that I would enjoy it more rather. The Strange Beasts of China by Yang Gi. So this is a fantastical novel studying or exploring, examining different groups of beasts in China, different communities, how they cloister together. So each chapter essentially is studying a different group of beasts, their physiology, how they look, how they act, how they socialize, how they live amongst humans, how humans view them. I think the best part of this book is the actual description of the beast and how imaginative that was. And each group kind of represents a group in our modern world. It is like a study of what it means to live in a modern city. I don't know if you can hear that car, it's super loud. But I think where this book faltered is that the through line that turns this book from what might be like short stories into a novel was super, super weak. So it just felt like half-baked. It didn't feel like the author kind of thought through how to tell a full story. It's almost like I have these ideas how to explore what living in a modern society and city might look like, and using like a fantastical sci-fi approach, but then it kind of fell flat. So I didn't really enjoy this, but I think if you're looking to read about other beings in a modern context and what that means, I would recommend The Cabinet, which I read maybe in like May, but that talks about like the physiology of like maybe alien type beings, but living alongside humans and the clashes that might happen there. Then I read, which you might be surprised that I read this because it is not really my forte, but I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So the reason I read this is that I joined a real human in-person book club, and this was the first pick because this is not necessarily something that I would gravitate towards. It is like an old Hollywood novel. We are following a woman, Evelyn Hugo, who is now an old woman, and she hires a journalist. Through a series of kind of odd circumstances, she reaches out to this journalist to tell her story, to essentially go back in time and explore, Evelyn Hugo, she was a Hollywood starlet, and she was known and famous for, kind of infamous for having 7 husbands and 7 marriages, and she wants to explain the way these different marriages came about. She wants to explain what was driving her, who she really was, why each relationship happened, and how each one fell apart, to kind of tell her story before she passes. So it was interesting. It was sometimes gripping, but I think to me that the framing narrative, we sometimes go out of Hugo's story to learn about the journalist who's supposed to be writing her story, and that just was like fairly dull. And I do think that where we end up is Evelyn explaining the connection that she has to this journalist and why she chose her to write her story. And to me, that just felt like you are forcing something that didn't need to happen. I don't really need to, because to me then it ends up the reader is left with feeling the way about Evelyn Hugo that our narrator or journalist feels. As a reader, I think Evelyn Hugo is a really interesting character, and she has a lot of kind of murkiness in her past, but she explains her reasoning and her actions really well. So as a reader, you kind of want to decide how you feel about different things about Evelyn Hugo, but we're almost forced to feel the way that the journalist feels, because of where the story ends up. So This is like not really my thing. I don't love like a Hollywood starlet tales. I'm just glad I joined the book club. So that's my main takeaway. Then I read another incredible book, another bodily book. I read Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. So this is my favorite Moshfegh. It beat out Eileen, which used to be my favorite. So this is a medieval novel, so maybe that's like why I really liked it. So we are following a young boy named Marek, living in a really poor, desolate town that's plagued by plague and corruption and depravity. And he is, he doesn't have a mother. His mother's disappearance and death is kind of mysterious, and we do learn a little bit more about that. His life is ruled by his addiction to suffering, the idea that Marek has, that the more you suffer, the more worthy you are to go into heaven, to have this afterlife, and how that really dictates a lot of his decisions and a lot of his own, the violences that he commits. But he is also under the brutal authority of his father, who's really vile, and we learn more about his past. We uncovered the different secrets of this town, what's ruling all of these people. But I think what Moshfegh does so well is that you really feel her opinion of these people. Her voice is like a character in this book. You really feel her playing with all of these different people, moving them around the town, making them interact with one another at just the right time. I think she introduces new villagers at just the right moment, where she like expands the village piece by piece by piece, all the way up to the man Phillip, who is like the overlord to this town, Trumpian in a lot of ways. And it is absolutely incredible. It has like the inappropriate levity that Moshfegh does so well, the dark humor. It's violent, disgusting, funny, deplorable, and I loved this. I just loved the setting. I loved where the story went. All of the characters are so interesting and engaging, and it really feels like this medieval parody of modern times. That was June. Then, deep breath, let's get some water. July, I was kind of all over the place. I was in Ireland with my family for just over 2 weeks. I was at a bachelorette party in Nashville. I was in New Hampshire, so bounced all over the place, but I did read, or actually, let's start here. I had been listening to this frickin' guy since like March or February. I don't even know. I listened to this on audiobook. This is Jonathon Stranger, Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, who wrote Piranesi, one of my favorite books of all time. Very different, very different than Piranesi. First of all, it's huge. Sorry, I don't know. My nose is like itchy. We have a duvet cover, and this is very off topic, but a duvet cover, and we put it in the dryer. All the buttons popped off, so now the duvet is like exploding feathers, and it's like making me itchy. Okay, this was one of the best experiences I've had with fiction ever, which is quite a statement, especially being that I listened to it instead of physically reading it. I don't usually have too much success with audiobooks, but I loved this. Oh my god, I loved it. It is like the essence of magic. It is political, funny, ostentatious, ridiculous, but it is, a Victorian London novel. It really has that tone. It really feels that way. It feels dark and damp and dreary, but it is about theoretical magicians versus practical magicians. The men that study magic versus the men who practice it, because Mr. Norrell is the one who brings magic back to England, or at least that's his story. That's what he's known for. He's famous. And then Jonathon Strange comes in, is kind of mentored by Mr. Norrell, and then they have a split and they're like warring. But that is only like one sliver of the book that kind of plays out throughout the novel, but more so than even that, there is, European wars going on that Mr. Norrell and Jonathon Strange get involved in. They use their magic to help win wars, fight battles. There are fallen soldiers who are brought back to life. There's fairies, there's African kingdoms, there's boats made out of rain droplets, warships made out of rain droplets, rather. This is like a treasure trove of a book. So I feel like I've lived many lifetimes reading this book. I loved it. It's one of my favorite books of the year. I mean, Susanna Clarke like has my whole heart. She can do no wrong in my mind. She, such different books, and they both fill me with so much joy, mystery, intrigue, beauty. This book also has like the ridiculous, the unreality in it again. I will say that the way this book ended, it does get like progressively darker and more kind of strange and mysterious, but it remains fun. And that's like my overall impression of it, that it's fun, magical, ridiculous, and brilliant. So loved this, and I'm so glad I took my time with it, because I feel like I just really got to enjoy it and savor every moment and every scene, because there are scenes that like really stick in my mind. The Fell by Sarah Moss. So this is a pandemic novel, which one of those books that takes place over like the course of a day or two. So a woman, Kate, is told to isolate in her home. She was exposed to COVID. She's a single mother who lives with her teenage son, and she goes stir crazy and needs to go out on a walk. So she goes up to the moors and falls and injures herself, and it's the conflicting fear of, if my mother is found, she'll be prosecuted for breaking her isolation, versus she's isolated on the moors, fallen, she's missing, what do I do? And it's this young boy has to like grapple with what to do in this decision. My overall impression of this book is that it was fine. It did kind of leave me wanting. I think some of Sarah Moss's goal in this book is to make it feel really tense, because his mother's missing. We're like on a countdown clock. Are the police going to be able to find her? Where is she on these moors? But I do think that a lot of the urgency of this book is lacking just in like the writing. It didn't feel very tense, but I do think Sarah Moss captured like a moment, a community, relationships in a really succinct and successful way. I just felt like a little bit bored by it. So yeah, I don't know if this one was really for me. Then I read another ton of French. So this is the third in the Dublin Murder Squad series, Faithful Place. I absolutely loved In the Woods and The Likeness. This I didn't love as much, but let's start with what it's about, because Tana French is always coming up with the next wacky crime that she's going to work through with her characters. So this is about a detective who left his home in Dublin when he like ran away when he was 18. He planned to run away with his girlfriend, who also lived in the same community, Faithful Place. But on the night that they were going to run away together, his girlfriend didn't show up to their meeting point. So he went anyway. He assumed that she had broken up with him, decided not to go. Many, many years later, her body is found in one of the homes in Faithful Place, and it's obvious that she was murdered on that night that they were supposed to run away together. So the detective returns to his home, which he swore he would never do, back to his family that has a lot of intense familial dynamics going on, and he's trying to find out what happened to the girl that was like the love of his life, and maybe she really was going to meet him, and the thought that like everything he believed was a mistake sends him reeling. The crime here, or not even the crime, but the way that the scene is set up is a little bit less gripping. The family dynamics kind of build, but it's a really slow start, I think, this book. Whereas some of the previous two books, like The Likeness, the story and the plot and the crime is so bizarre. You're like, what the hell is going on here? There's a sense of like unbelievability that makes you want to uncover what's going on. This book didn't have that. And I think it most certainly is like such a skill that French has to dedicate herself so fully to her character study and her character development that her voice is lost. You like feel nothing of Tana French in her books, because it really is like she's dedicated to her character so much and she makes them so real. But at the same time, Frank in this book and all of the people around him that pop up and play a role are all so misogynistic that like it was sometimes just like so hard to read. I just like could not connect at all. I was so like exhausted and over it. Whereas a book like Lapvona, all these horrible conversations and depravities going on, but you really feel Moshfegh's voice and personality in this book, where like that's why it's darkly humorous, whereas this is like straight up misogyny. And I'm like, I appreciate that French is so dedicated to her characters, but like this is not a character I wanted to read from and be with so closely throughout a pretty long book. I love French. I love her as an author. I really enjoyed her other 2 books that I've read so far. So we will see. This one just wasn't as successful for me. Then, the last book of July. I talked about this in my Ireland video. I'm pretty sure. I know I cut a lot of that out because I just kept rambling. But I read A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. Obviously, the Wolf Hall trilogy is one of like the best things I've ever read. I hold those books as like the epitome of great historical fiction writing. This is following Danton, Robespierre, and Desmoulins. Obviously, I can't say any of these names, but it is about the French Revolution, following the 3 men at the heart of it. It's messier than Wolf Hall and like that whole trilogy. I think because we're following 3 men so closely versus, just Thomas Cromwell, where we were jumping around a lot. Some of like the timelines were a little bit confusing, but I think it's also that I'm very familiar with and like I love to study like Tudor history, so that wasn't really new to me at all. Whereas the French Revolution, I went in knowing the bare minimum. So there were so many names I didn't know, so many like historical moments I really had no idea about. So I did feel like a lot of it went over my head, but at the same time, I absolutely love Mantel's writing. She really sucks you in. She makes it come to life. You feel like you're there in these sitting rooms where all these big decisions and intense conversations are happening. She is so good at setting up a scene, from like the way somebody might be dressed to the way they might enter a room, their mannerisms. She makes these men so vivid in your mind, and kind of strips them down to who they might have really been. But yeah, I think she dedicates herself to one perspective, and she like sinks into it and brings you with her in all these sitting rooms, all these decisions, all these small and big conversations. And I feel like I lived in this world, in these Parisian homes and apartments, and I really felt like I was there. So I love Mantel. And then, should we just do August? I feel like, I don't know how long I've been recording, but I feel like we should just do August and be done with it. Because I only read 3 books in August, and one of them I didn't care about. So let's start with that, because that will be quick. I read The Delivery by Peter Mendelsund, and I do have to say it's a really cool cover, playing with the idea that people write a novel, a novel, a novel, a novel. So it is about a delivery man in an unnamed city. It starts off being like really sparse, the actual writing, and it builds in complexity. It is about a man who, he's works in a really monotonous job where he's not appreciated, he's undervalued, he's overworked. The idea that he feels separate and alien to this town where he immigrated to, but at the same time he might know the city more than the natives because of how he engages with the people who live there. I think for me, honestly, what I love, and that's why I read so many really big chunky books, is I love like the richness of words and stories and characters. Where books like this, I know like this would really, really appeal to some people because it is like this quick character study, and it does build, and like eventually the chapters are a little bit more traditional where like they're fully formed and not sparse, because we're learning more about his background, so he's becoming fuller and richer to us, and he's not just this delivery boy, and we're learning more about his background and the way that he's thinking. And it does have almost like this video game-esque, there's someone pulling the strings and making this delivery boy do these things. It does have like that added element, and I'm not even sure how, sorry, my card was full. Yeah, I just wanted more from it. I wanted like more story, more plot, more oomph. But it was a really smart book, so it just wasn't for me. It left me kind of, again, wanting more. All right, we are on our last 2 books. We are almost there, and this is a big one. I read A Little Life as part of Justin Morgan's like big book August book club. So I'm sure you know what this is about. If you've wanted to read it by now, you probably already have. It is about 4 men who become friends at college, Jude, Willem, JB, and Malcolm, following their friendship through many, many decades, but more so, we're really following Jude, his story, his life, because he does not share anything about his past with his 4 friends. His past is really mysterious. His parents, where he's from, where he grew up. He has this mysterious ailment with his legs. And as we go along in this book, people either love it or hate this book. And I think, I was gripped throughout. I didn't love it, but I do think it's really successful at following these 4 men throughout their lives. These really sometimes beautiful and fraught relationships. I don't even know how to really talk about this book. I think some people find fault with the fact that these various traumas that we learn that Jude experienced and that he actually ends up experiencing as an adult as well, that it seems unbelievable that so much could happen to one person. And who's really to say whether it's reasonable or not, or realistic or not. I do think that while we learn so much about what happened to him when he was a child, the trauma, the horrific trauma, and we have a lot of detail that happens to him as an adult while we're following him in modern times, was perhaps going too far. For me, that wasn't the problem. It wasn't that so many things happened to this one character. What felt off to me was that as a reader, because so much of this story is focused on the fact that we don't know about Jude, and we will get detail or small hints at these really horrific things that happened to him as a child, and slowly we uncover them. What felt odd to me is that so much of our experience as readers of this book is that we are propelled by trying to figure out what happened to him. What physically happened to him. We want the details, which feels odd to me because I don't need to know the details of someone's trauma to empathize or to understand why they might behave some way. So I think it did feel invasive that we got so many details. But I do think if the relationships between the 4 men and eventually, Harold and Andy, if we didn't have those relationships, I probably wouldn't have finished it, because it just felt like what's propelling this book, what's making me want to continue reading, and the relationships is what made me want to continue reading, not to find out what happened to Jude. Eventually, when some of the relationships, things happen, I'm like, well, what am I reading for? And honestly, what kept me reading and what made me finish the book is Harold. He's a mentor figure and eventually becomes a father figure to Jude. But at the same time, I was gripped throughout. It's over 800 pages. The characters were rich. Each of the 4 men, if their name wasn't said, you would know who's doing the action, who's saying something. They've all felt really real and distinct and vivid in your mind. It just felt like I don't want to be reading to find out the details of what happened to somebody as a child. I don't need to read a book that has light at the end of the tunnel, but for me, when there's nothing left, what am I reading for? So that's where I landed with this one. I'm glad I read it. But I read for Harold at the end of it. That's what kept me here, more than anything else, because that's all I have to say. That's really all I have to say. Then the last book that I read in August is kind of a strange one to read in August, because it is a book about the Arctic and it's all covered in snow, but it is The Golden Compass by Phillip Pullman. So this is my first ever book by Phillip Pullman. I know he has this hold on readers, but it is about a young girl named Lyra and her grand adventure that sets her on a path. She is, the destined child. There's a lot of people pulling the strings that Lyra feels. She's forced into a lot of these situations, but there's armored bears and demons who are, every single human being has a demon. They're little creatures that are part of a human soul, and they take the form of a bunch of different animals, and eventually when you become an adult, they stay in one distinct form. And Lyra's, her relationship with her demon is like one of the highlights of reading this book, but also the setting. Everything is covered in snow. You're really taken on this grand adventure, and I think if I had read this as a child, I would have loved it, so I'm sad that I didn't. I love an Arctic setting with the northern lights, the aurora, and it ended at a really good spot that makes you definitely want to pick up the next one. So those are my summer reads. I know that was kind of a lot, but now I feel like I can close this chapter in my life and move on with some new books. Right now I am reading another big book. I don't know, I'm in that mood. I'm not loving like these little wispy books. I want something big that I can really like sit with for a while. But yes, that is all I have for you today. I know that's a lot, but I hope to be back soon. I want to start vlogging again, even if it's not like reading a book from start to finish, but just like picking up the camera one day and saying like, this is what I'm reading right now, here are my thoughts, and then ending it maybe that same day, and you know, doing a bunch of different other things around the city. So I'm not like, oh, I have to read a book start to finish, because sometimes it takes me, you know, I'm sitting with these really long books, and sometimes it takes me like 2 weeks to read them, and I'm not up, I like, you know, fall out of it when I'm filming for such a long time. So that is what I'm gonna try to do. Yeah, I hope to see you all very soon, and thank you for watching. Bye everyone.